Welcome back to another episode of Meghalaya Answers with me, Joe Tankil, along with experts who will be answering some questions related to COVID disease in general, elderly care, and psychosocial advice. Our respected doctors from the Meghalaya Government Health and Family Welfare, I would first and foremost like to ask if you can kindly please introduce yourself. Can we start with you, Doctor?
I'm Dr. Betalan Sohlet. I am a retired psychiatrist from Civil Hospital Shillong.
I am Dr. Andreas Dukhar. I'm a Joint Director cum Surgeon Superintendent of Civil Hospital Shillong.
I am Dr. Vijay Noel Naupir, Assistant Professor of TB and Respiratory Diseases from NIGRIMS, Shillong.
I'm Dr. Demetros Lalu, Medical Specialist, Ganesh Das Hospital.
Thank you very much, respected doctors. This question number one goes to Dr. Nongpure. Is COVID-19 still a pandemic? And what tips would you give to patients to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and protect oneself from this virus?
So, COVID-19, as of now, it is still very much a pandemic. The infections is still very rampant in this world, as we can see from the news, both print and in the other media. And also from information all over, we can see that there's in fact what the so-called second wave has hit again most of the Western countries, Europe and the United States. And again, we're seeing a surge in the number of new cases being reported and also the number of fatalities. So definitely we are still in the middle of this pandemic. As of now, there's still we're still not seeing any decrease in the number of cases. And with regards to what one can do to prevent this, now recently of late we've been seeing a lot in the news that vaccines have come into the fore. Previously, we have not had these vaccines. Now there are 4 vaccines which have come into the fore. So that is a significant addition to the armamentarium in our fight against COVID. But the backbone of all for this fight against COVID still remains what we can actually see here in front of us: our masks, our sanitizer, physical distancing. That still remains the backbone of our fight. Yes, vaccines are a very significant addition to the fight against COVID, but we're still very new or very nascent into this world of vaccines. We really don't know. We really don't have that much of information about these vaccines. So we can only hope in the near future that we'll get more help from these vaccines. But as of now, the basic protection to protect not just oneself, but the entire community per se, is hand hygiene, use of masks, sanitizers, soap and water, and maintaining physical distancing.
And Doctor, one Stephanie Grace wants to know this. How is COVID-19 different from other respiratory viruses?
Thank you. That's a very important question actually. So COVID-19, when we look at COVID-19, clinically, it's very difficult for us to differentiate it from the other respiratory viruses, the flu viruses, influenza viruses and all. And especially now in winter, this is the season that one gets your seasonal flu. So when we look at COVID-19, the most common reported symptoms of COVID-19 are actually your cough, which usually is dry. Then you have your myalgias, your body aches and headaches. These are the most commonly reported symptoms. Interestingly, fever is not a very common symptom at the outset. So when the symptoms start, you usually do not start with fever. They start with cough, body aches, headaches and all. And then fever is not universally present at onset. The other symptoms that one can get from COVID is sore throat, less commonly diarrhea. Then and interestingly, we've seen a lot of cases where patients who have symptomatic COVID, they also report a sense of a loss of taste and loss of smell. So that is also seen. Now, one thing which can distinguish but we really cannot use it as a hard pointer to distinguish COVID from other respiratory viruses is we see very less of rhinorrhea or runny nose. That is more commonly seen in the other seasonal viruses, your allergies or the other seasonal viruses. Is not a very common clinical symptom seen in COVID-19. So other than that, the other clinical features are actually very similar to your other respiratory virus, because COVID-19 itself is a respiratory virus, it's a coronavirus. So you have your even your seasonal viruses, those that cause your seasonal flu, most of them, even other coronaviruses can also cause your seasonal viruses, in addition to the influenza type A and type B viruses. Even other coronaviruses can also cause. So there is definitely a big overlap in the symptoms. There is a lot of similarity, and so it's very difficult to distinguish clinically without a laboratory test whether the symptoms that a person has is actually due to COVID or not.
This question is from Aitihun Sumer and Miranda Nongbet for Dr. Lalu. Dr. Lalu, how do you differentiate between normal cold and COVID? And is it possible to have flu and COVID-19 at the same time?
Well, this is also another very important question actually. Lots of people who have COVID, they think that they have common cold. Means the symptoms that they show are more like common cold. But there are certain things that a common cold and COVID-19, they're different in some ways. Like for example, a common cold, usually you don't get fever. It means you do get fever, but it usually doesn't happen. But in COVID-19, you do get fever more often than cold. Okay, so when it comes to symptoms like say sneezing, that happens more with cold than with COVID-19. And if you are talking about what doctor has said before, rhinorrhea, running nose and all, that is more common with cold than what we are seeing with COVID-19. Okay, so these are some of the differences. There might be other differences like say some of the symptoms that COVID-19 patients have reported are the loss of taste of smell and loss of sensation of smell and taste. So actually this one is not there in cold. It happens only when you have a stuffy nose. When you have a cold and you have a stuffy nose, then you do get those symptoms. Otherwise, usually you don't get. So these are some of the differences between cold and COVID-19. Okay. And then regarding the second question, whether a person can get COVID-19 and flu at the same time, the answer is yes. There have been reported cases in the Western countries, of course, of a patient having both COVID-19 and flu, influenza. Since both are respiratory diseases, so any person who has both COVID-19 and flu at the same time, actually they are at a higher risk of severe diseases, because both the diseases attack the lungs, means they affect the lungs eventually. So yes, there are reported cases. Yes, we do get.
Thank you, doctor. Okay, Dr. Andreas, this question is for you. How contagious are asymptomatic patients, and are people in pre-symptomatic phase contagious too?
Yeah, the patients who are asymptomatic, they may be contagious. They may infect others. Similarly, the pre-symptomatic. Pre-symptomatic means, say, if the patient get contacted today, then he may develop symptoms from the third day onwards, because incubation period is around 2 to 7 days. Now, whether it's pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic patients, once they have the virus inside their body, especially in the in the nostrils, in the nose, on the throat, they are contagious to others. They may infect others. As we are working in the hospital, we have seen many a times where when we test, the patient is negative, but when we test the patient party, he becomes positive, though he is asymptomatic. So it's very important this random testing to detect either the asymptomatic one, especially these, healthy people and all, they may become asymptomatic. And of course, pre-symptomatic also we do detect in random testing. So this is very important. So I think both are infectious to others.
Well, thank you. If I just want to add on that, again, this is one thing which is actually quite one of the soft differences between the seasonal influenza and your COVID. The pre-symptomatic, the period when after a person, say person A contracts the virus to the time he becomes starts to develop symptoms, that usually is around between 5 to 10 days. So the pre-symptomatic period, we've seen that the studies have shown that in COVID-19, a majority of actual transmission actually occurs in the pre-symptomatic for COVID, which is less so in the seasonal influenza. So in the seasonal influenza, a person becomes most infectious the first day that he develops his symptoms. The first day he develops his fever or cough and all, that's the time when he becomes most infectious. Whereas with COVID, studies have shown that the period of maximum infectivity is actually 2 to 3 days before they develop symptoms. It peaks at around a day before they start developing symptoms, and once these patients develop their symptoms, it then gradually, the infectiousness of the person actually gradually tapers down. So pre-symptomatic transmission and these people who are who have contracted before they develop symptoms, that's the time when they are maximally infectious. And the same thing is with asymptomatic. Asymptomatic, as is, they don't really develop any symptoms. So asymptomatics actually are a very because we don't test them. Other than random testing, they are not this thing. They most of them will not go for voluntary testing also. So they are a very gray zone. We don't know the actual numbers, how many are there, but yes, they are very much capable of transmitting the disease.
We have a question from one Larry. Larry wants to know, who is a high-risk contact and what are the steps to be followed by the high-risk contacts? Dr. Andreas, if you please.
The high-risk contacts are those caretakers, whether the healthcare workers or the patient's relatives who come in touch with the body fluids of the patient, say like respiratory tract secretions, okay, the urine, feces and all. And then direct physical contact. Suppose you do a handshake or a hugging to the positive patients, and then by chance if you touch the linens, the clothes of the positive patients without taking proper care, without wearing PPEs and all, and then anyone who lives close or who stays close with a positive patient less than 1 meter, okay, or for more than 15 minutes, and anyone, if you happen to travel with the patient for more than 6 hours with close proximity less than 1 meter, then there is a chance of high risk contact. Of course, in the hospital, for us the health workers, the main thing when we treat such patient, any breach of PPE, okay, if by chance we remove the mask or by chance we remove the face shield or the PPE, or by chance we touch the front part of the PPE, then there's a chance there are high risk contacts. They become under high risk contact. So these are the criteria for the high risk contacts to classify as high risk contact. Once we identify a person as a high risk contact, then same thing as we have been discussing, patient should be such person should be kept isolated. He should maintain isolation, all those hand wash, use mask, okay, and social distancing. Usually we keep him, advise them to stay alone, and such person should be tested between 5 to 14 days. On the 5th day, usually we test such person on the 5th day, and he should be tested if he is negative, then but we will still put him under isolation.
And doctor, another question is, for those people who are not at high risk, then why is it important to stay at home and physical distancing?
Those persons who are not high risk. If they have come contact, maybe in the same school, say like we call it low risk, say in a big room like this or in a school, you are sitting but you are not less than 1 meter, you are sitting far from the patient. But if you share the same room, usually we don't advise them for strict home isolation, but they should use mask, hand sanitizer, and then say like if in the office or somewhere, if the patient becomes positive, but you are not closely contact, then we don't keep them for isolation right now.
Thank you, doctor.
So just to add, if somebody has had a definite contact, he knows that he's definitely come in contact with the patient who has suffered or who is symptomatic for COVID. The most important thing is not to panic, not to be alarmed. We would advise isolation, maintaining your hand hygiene, your social physical distancing, use of masks, and because that is what will help you mitigate the spread if by any chance, unfortunate chance, that you may have contracted. Otherwise, if you remain asymptomatic, the most important thing is following all these measures, try to isolate if you can, and to monitor yourself for symptoms. That's the most important thing. So self-monitoring of symptoms, thermometers are easily available now. In fact, your finger pulse oximeters are easily available in the market. You can always keep one, especially if you have an elderly at home where you need to monitor their symptoms. It's very important to keep one nowadays. So you monitor those symptoms, and if you feel unwell, especially within the period of 5 days, then that's a time when, number one, you can contact the health professionals either through 108 or any of the other helplines and get yourself tested at any time. If not, and if you feel that your exposure has been a high risk, then along with all these, get yourself tested at day 5 if you don't have any symptoms. Otherwise, the moment you have any symptoms, that's the time when you should get yourself tested. So staying at home and self-monitoring of your symptoms is most important.
Dr. Nongpure, there's one question from one Azad. He wants to know, how long does the coronavirus stay alive on surfaces, meaning on the non-living things?
Yeah, so like we all know, one of the most important modes of transmission of the disease, rather than direct inhalation of the droplets from another person's cough or sneeze, is actually through contact of inanimate surfaces, or fomites as we usually call them. So there has been a study which was conducted in the United States sometime in sometime in March, April, and there the experts there compared the SARS-CoV-2, the COVID virus, and SARS-CoV, the original SARS virus of 2004, and they compared these two viruses with respect to how long they tend to remain in surfaces. So what they found was that in plastics, the virus can remain viable for almost 72 hours. In stainless steel, for around 48 hours. In copper, interestingly, the virus dies after 4 hours, and in cardboard, it usually remains for only around 24 hours. So these are because most of our materials that we find in and around us are usually made of one of these. So plastic, we tend to use a lot of plastic cups and so there the virus can stay for almost 72 hours. So that is how long the virus. And in the air as an aerosol, usually we've seen that they usually survive for 6 to 8 hours maximum. In fact, just one single report where they've noted that viable viruses was viral RNA, not we really can't say viable viruses, but viral RNA was detected in the aerosol after almost 16 hours. But that is more of an extreme. Usually it's within 6 to 8 hours that the virus can remain viable, suspended in the air, and in objects, like I said.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Andreas, there are a lot of apprehensions in patients suffering from other respiratory ailments while approaching hospitals. Now, how do doctors confirm that the patient has corona or other respiratory ailments?
Yes, there is lots of apprehension, patient suffering from respiratory illness to come to the hospital. I would not say only respiratory illness. Apprehension is for all patients. We have got lots of diabetes patients, lots of hypertensive patients who are not coming to hospital. They say we are scared, especially the elderlies. They are not coming to a hospital being scared to contact coronavirus. Now I think what I would advise is, I think if same thing, there are three things: sanitizers, hand washing, masks, and social distancing. That is what we are trying to do in the hospital. These things are to be maintained. They can always come to the hospital, and we have seen lots. I have seen a case where blood pressure of 200 by 100 and patient was scared to come to the hospital. So this is what we are scared. Patient may die not of COVID, but they may die of something else. They may die of stroke, they may die of heart attack. So that is what we are scared. So I will encourage the patient to come to the hospital for checkup, but wearing a proper mask, maintain your hand washing, and social distancing, especially while registration and all those things are to be maintained. The number two is corona. We cannot differentiate between coronavirus and other spaces, like what we have discussed, common flu, common cold, or flu-like illness. Only thing we can differentiate between these two are, one, history. If there is history of contact or history of travel, okay, to those infected areas, then we may think, and then if history of contact with a confirmed case, with a lab confirmed case, if the patient comes with symptoms, as Dr. Vijay have said, if patient develops symptoms with the history that he has contact or he has taken care of some laboratory confirmed case, then only we may suspect COVID-19 or any respiratory tract infection where we cannot find the cause. Then we may suspect. But to say it is a COVID, then it's only by testing. Clinically, we cannot, but we have to do a test to confirm the case.
Dr. Demi Lalu, this question is for you. Whether the COVID-19 patient who has recovered, is that person immune from the disease?
See, we were hoping for that actually. When COVID-19 first came out, all of us, since it was a viral disease or a respiratory disease, we have seen some respiratory viral disease. What happens is if they get infected and then they get some amount of immunity, so they don't get infection right away. For at least say like a SARS, they are immune for at least 2 to 3 years. So we were expecting something like that, but unfortunately that is not the case. Of all the studies that have been done all over the world, what common thing that they have come up with is up to 90 days a person is relatively safe. Not completely safe, relatively safe. It doesn't mean that he won't get reinfected, but the chances are very, very less, very, very less. Up to 90 days. Beyond 90 days, the person has the same chances of being infected like anyone else. Okay. To say that a person who has recovered is immune to the disease, and no. For some amount of time, yes, he may be protected, but then again after some time he might have a chance of reinfection.
So just to add to that, there is a lot of we see a lot of in the real world scenario where we've seen a lot of patients who have come, tested positive, completely asymptomatic, did well, were declared recovered, and for some reason or the other, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks down the line, they do a retest and comes positive again. So that is a question that has been lingering: is that a reinfection? Now, this is a very it's a very fuzzy area, whether that is an actual reinfection or an entity what we call as prolonged viral shedding. So prolonged viral shedding is basically when a person has become has recovered, or somebody who's in asymptomatic has completed this thing, but his period of isolation and is no longer deemed infectious. Now, with regards to infectivity of the virus, also we've seen there's been multiple studies from the United States, from Korea also, where they've seen that a number of these patients who have actually been tested positive after recovering, because when you look at all these tests which we are doing, whether you talk of your PCR, whether you talk of your CBNAT, your TrueNAT, you talk of your rapid antigen tests, all these tests basically what they do is just detect a part of the viral RNA. Now, the viral RNA may be present even in a dead virus. Even a dead virus has the viral RNA. So, to actually prove that a person who has tested positive again has been reinfected, you need A, the genome of the first virus, and B, the genome of the second virus, compare it. That will tell you whether there has been a reinfection. And secondly, the second test you need what we call as a culture to actually determine whether these viruses which were tested by the molecular tests are actually viable or alive. Now, if the culture grows, it means that virus is alive. There is a high possibility that yes, that indeed was a reinfection. But the tests which we are doing that is not so. They will only tell us whether viral RNA was detected or not. Whether these viruses are alive or dead, nobody knows. So, we've seen a lot of circumstances. There's been a study from Korea where almost 250 supposed reinfections, none of their cultures grew positive. So, even those scientists there have assumed that this is probably just a prolonged viral shedding, where a person has recovered clinically, no more symptoms, but for some reason or the other, the viruses in the nasopharynx have not cleared. So, that's why when you repeat a molecular test from that area, you're still getting the same RNA, and that has come out as positive. So, that is why this question of becoming re-positive after recovery, it's still a very grey zone, and viral culture is not an easy task. You need a BSL 3-4 level, biosafety level 3 or 4 to have to establish a viral culture lab, and it's very exhaustive, very labor intensive. It's not being done. Plus, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We can't culture millions of samples. So that's a very difficult thing to actually conclusively diagnose whether this has been an actual reinfection or just a prolonged viral shedding, especially since the person at the onset of his initial disease was completely asymptomatic.
Well, that's it for today, but don't worry, Meghalaya Answers will be back on our next episode with our experts to answer more questions related to COVID-19. Stay safe.